So I was looking at a house today on Zillow, and it was it cost about 150. So this house costs about 150. So it's listed with a realtor, and it costs 150. It will rent for about, let's see, I think it was 1,500. I think it was 1,500 for the rent. So rent. Now, okay, so you have to put down 30 here. So you got to put down 30,000. That's 20%. Oh, you know what? Let's say 25%. So let's say that you put down 25%. So that's $37,000. Let me check my work to make sure. Yeah. So that's $37,000 that you have to put down to buy this property. So let's erase this and let's say 37. Oh, let's just say 40 grand. Let's just say, okay, you got to put down 40 grand to buy this property. So 40 grand down. So now you're at, what's that, 110, 110K. Now that's your loan. Now, the loan on this would be, let's go to my mortgage calculator here on my phone. So 110 and interest rates for, let's just say interest rates for this would be at, let's just say 7% or let's say 6%. Okay, so 6%. So at 6% interest for a 30-year mortgage, your payment will be $659. So let's just say $660. So 660 is your payment. Now with taxes and insurance, let's add like another, man, let's just add the house, this house here that I was looking at, the taxes on this house, because of the area that the house was in, the taxes weren't that much. So they were like, man, I think they were like $70 to $100. Let's just say $100. Let's just add $200 for taxes and insurance. Taxes and insurance. Okay, so let's add $200. So this to buy this house, it will cost you $860. $860. Okay, so $860. That's how much it'll cost you. As far as putting away some money to set aside for unexpected expenses and stuff like that. Usually what I do is I halve the rent, and really when I halve the rent, that's like your net. That's what you're keeping, and then you take the mortgage out of that. but but that's being really conservative when you have the rent. But let's just say that you wanted to set aside, oh man, like $150 per month, and that's crazy low. So that's 11. So that's 1,000. Let me check this work. I don't want my math to be wrong at all. So yeah. So 1,010 is what you'll be coming out of pocket to buy this house. So minus this, so 1,500 minus 110, 490. So this is your net. This is what you'll be keeping if you don't have to, pay for any other expenses that come up, like, lawn care and man, so this number here is subject to change with gross leases. That's why I don't like gross leases. And this is kind of the point of this video. I'm trying to show you what I was looking at earlier. And I'm looking at this property here. I'm looking at this property on Zillow. I'm just looking on Zillow sometimes to see if there are any deals out there. You sometimes when you're looking, you want something to be a deal, but usually good deals are already snatched up by other investors when you look at on Zillow because everyone has access to it. So as I was looking at this, I was like, okay, so 490. If you keep that, I mean, it probably would be prudent for you to half this and say, so let's half this and say that 245 is what you're actually keeping per month. $245. That's what you're keeping per month for this deal. So you halving this for expenses. So $245. That's what you keep it. Houses are terrible as far as being rentals. And I've made a video about this before. But I was thinking about the country as a whole, and we're all dealing with this because prices are going way up. They're going up faster than the rents. So everyone in the country is dealing with this. Like we're looking at houses and we're trying to make them work as long-term rentals, but they just don't. They just don't right now. They just don't right now because of this interest rate right now. Interest rates are high. So, when you look at this scenario, and this is for a long term, let me make sure that is, let me make sure I'm stating that clearly. This is for a long-term rental. Now short-term rentals, of course you'll get more money in rent, but I have no experience. Actually, I don't have any experience with a rental. I don't have a rental yet, but I know so many investors who rent their houses out, and they tell me all their stories, what they're renting their houses for and how that's going for them and what I should do when I get into rental, having rentals. Once I start building my portfolio, which I'm at that stage now, so I've been wholesaling and bird dogging for 9 years. This if you've been on this channel, but now I've saved up enough money to be able to get into the rental game here. And I'm trying to figure out what to buy, and I want to buy houses, but houses just do not work for me as long-term rentals. Now they do work if you can get multiple of them at the same time. I had a guy, I want to tell this story really quick. I had a guy a long time ago. I didn't do a deal with this guy. He was an older man. I think he was about 80 years old. And he had 10 houses. And they were beautiful houses. I looked them all up. And they were beautiful, bro. They were some beautiful houses. And he wanted to sell his whole portfolio. Actually, I had sent him a letter in the mail. And if you want to learn how to do direct mail like me, look in the description. But I sent him a letter in the mail, and I was, asking him about one property he has. And I wanted to buy it. I sent him a letter in the mail because I wanted to buy one of his properties, and I loved his property. I loved the location that his property was in. And then once I figured out that he had this whole portfolio, I I realized that all of his houses are in great, great, lovely neighborhoods. So I want his whole portfolio. I wanted his whole portfolio, even though I did not have the money at the time. Excuse me. I did want to. I'll tell you the story though. So I got in contact with this guy about one of his houses. He said he did not want to sell that house. And then, we were talking and talking. And then he said, if you want to, you can buy my whole portfolio from me. And I was like, okay, well, how many houses do you have? When somebody says that, when someone says you can buy my whole portfolio, I get excited. I'm like, what? What you mean? What do you have? Because I know it's a big number, and I know it's like, it's always exciting to hear these millions and hundreds of thousands of dollars being thrown around. It's always great to hear that. So, when he said that, I was like, what you mean? Well, how many houses do you have? What do you have? Do you have commercial? What's in your portfolio? He said, I have 10 houses and I want $1 million for all of them. And I was like, okay, so how much are they making? He said that he was bringing in about $10,000 per month. Now, usually when people say these numbers here, what they're bringing in per month, you have to take it as gross. You have to take it as gross because you don't know. You don't know. And then, people like to exaggerate a little bit. He he said 10, but he's probably he's probably netting half that. He's probably netting 5K. My files are just trash. He's probably netting 5K, to be honest. So this is what he's netting. So he's netting this. So he said he wanted $1 million for his whole portfolio. And he has some great houses. He probably, I wouldn't be surprised if he was netting this, because his houses, all of his houses were probably renting for close to $1,500 per month. I think he was getting about $1,500 per month in rent from each house because they were in great neighborhoods. So he probably is making, let's just assume that he is making about $10,000 net, because all of his houses were paid off. You know what I'm saying? He didn't have any, he didn't have any mortgages or anything like that. So he probably was getting $10,000. He probably wasn't lying. This older guy, like I said, he was 82 years old. That's right, seller. So seller, he was 82 years old. So he probably was getting $10,000 net. So he wanted $1 million. And, I told him when we was on the phone, I was like, okay, well, look, let me give you a call back and see if I can get someone to partner up with me on this. And so I hung up on him, and I called a buddy of mine, a cash buyer, investor that I know, that I've been working with, that I had been working with at that time for a couple of years. I called him. I said, man, look, this guy wants to sell his whole portfolio for $1 million. Are you interested? Do you want to look into this? And I sent him, he was like, yeah, I want to look into it, man. So, send me the addresses. So I sent him all the addresses, and we were looking at them, together. I was on the phone with him, and we were looking on our computers at them. And then my investor was like, man, he had some beautiful property. Like, he had some really nice rentals. I mean, his houses were really nice. 1,500 square feet. They all were like 3 bed, 2 baths. Like the perfect houses. They were in great neighborhoods. they all had garages, and I mean, they were just great houses. I think they all were built in like um, the 1980s. Yeah, like the 1980s. So they were great houses, bro. They was great. They were great houses. Um, so my investor friend, he was interested. He was like, man, see, see if he will, take like, I think, my investor wanted to see if he would take something under 1 million. So I called the guy back. I called the seller back. I said, man, listen, I have a partner with me on this deal. I'm going to have a partner with me on this deal, but we want to know whether or not you will take anything under 1 million. And he was like, let me think about it. Let me think about it. I'll give you a call back. And so I said, okay. So I waited around for a couple weeks, and he didn't call me back. And I started to get worried. I was like, man, come on, man, call me back. Because with this deal here, if we would have got it for, let's just say if we would have got it for 700,000, if we would have got it for 700,000, I would have made 100,000. I think, me and the cash buyer that I was working with at this time, I was telling him, I said, man, I want like 100 grand, bro. I want like 100 grand if we can get it for 700,000. And he was like, okay, he was cool with this. So he was going to be all in, closing costs and all that. He was going to be all in at this number at 800 grand. So this would have worked out for him because he was going to keep all these for the income, the cash flow. He was going to keep it for he was keeping all this for cash flow because he already had other properties anyway. And this would have just added 10 properties to his portfolio. So, he was just going to keep it for cash flow. And, I mean, you're getting a pretty nice, you're getting a pretty nice return on this. I think he was going to, he probably was going to use a loan to get this though. Maybe he was going to use cash. Maybe he was going to, he might have, I don't know what he was going to do, but this number here was going to work for him. So, I was really excited about this. Man, I've almost made this like at one time, I've almost made this number here like 3 or 4 times. I've almost made this 3 or 4 times. I guarantee you I'm going to make this at one time, this early in my investing career. I'm going to make this soon at one time. If you keep doing this, you run into deals like this, and you're going to close on one of these. What I'm saying? You're going to go, but if you stop looking, if you quit, you won't never get to this point to where you can find an opportunity where you could make this at one time. But I have several other stories I have on my channel about me almost making this, on several different deals. But so I was going to make this. I was going to make this here, and my investor was going to, buy this at he was cool at 800,000. I don't know what he was going to do. Maybe he was going to use all cash. I don't know, because this will bring you in. So this is bringing you in times 12. This is 120,000 a year. So, I mean, that's a pretty nice return on this cash here. It's a pretty nice return. What is that? It's over 10. It's over 10%. Let's see what this is. 800 grand. That's a 15% return. It's nice. It's nice. It's nice. His portfolio. So my investors, rentals. So his portfolio is bringing in on average about 24%. So he's bringing in like 24%. So this would have taken him down a little bit, but I mean, who cares, man? Who cares? As long as you're getting some good, a good, clear margin of profit, off your portfolio. And then with this, everything was taken care of. That's another thing that this seller had that I loved. is that he had respect for his tenants. His houses, we saw that, he sent us a couple pictures of a few of his houses, and they all looked good. They look good. Like I said, they were built in 1980. In the 1980s, all of the houses were built around this time. So they were okay. They were in okay condition inside. They weren't like a 1940 or 1950s built house where it's just old, technology in there, and it would be prudent to update that technology in those old houses, 1940s, 1950s. You need to update that, at least get it to this standard, this year's standard. You know what I mean? Just at least get it to that decade's standards of how houses look in the inside, and how they were built. So that's one thing I like about this seller. So my investor, my cash buyer here, he wouldn't have had to, this portfolio of houses wouldn't have caused him that much trouble. So this would have been a good return for him, putting this cash down and getting this here per year. So that's a 15% return. That would have been nice for him. But the guy never called me back. He never called me back. So I called him and I said, man, this is Kelvin, and we spoke a couple weeks ago about your house, because sometimes you have to reintroduce yourself to these older people, because they talk to so many people, and they kind of forget you. Because when I called him back, he kind of knew who I was, but he was kind of like, oh, okay, you know what I mean? So I told him, I said, man, I spoke to you a couple weeks ago, on and off, I'm interested in your portfolio. You said you wanted to sell your portfolio for 1 million. Me and a partner of mine were interested in it, and you said you had to think on it. So I waited. I never heard back from you. Are you still interested in selling? If so, I'm really interested, and I would like to see, some of them in person. And he was like, you know what? I decided not to sell. And I was like, dang. I was like, okay, well, if you ever change your mind, give me a call back. And he hung up the phone. He decided not to sell because, you know what? It was getting really close to, oh, man. I think during that time, it was during this deal, it was getting close to 2020. And you know what happened in 2020, February, March of 2020. So it was getting close to this time. So we've been, in 2019, he was kind of hearing some things that was going on, like, oh, there's something going around, and people are kind of panicking and things like that. So we was hearing these things here, but we didn't really pay too much attention to it. The president was saying that it wasn't nothing to be fearful about. So we weren't really worried about what was happening in 2019, at the end of 2019. But this deal was happening during this time. So I think what happened was this guy got kind of fearful about what was going to happen. If what was going on during this time really turned into something, he got kind of fearful. So he decided to hang on to his portfolio. And then there were some things at the time. I can remember this very clearly. I can remember this. There were some things at the time on the news. They were talking about, older people, and their retirement plans, and how, Social Security was, I don't know what was going on, but the news that was going on at the time was kind of like, it was for older people, and it was like, you need to make sure you have a really, really stable flow of income coming in from other sources than Social Security and all of that. So older people were going back to work, and I can remember that during that time, because I said that was one of the things that kept this guy from selling his portfolio to us. I was like, man, he was listening to the news. That's what I was telling this investor here. I was like, man, he was listening to the news too much, man. They were on there talking about, older people not being able to retire comfortably because they don't have any, good income sources coming in. So that may have been it, or it may have been, or maybe not. I don't know. But he decided not to sell. So we missed out on this, but this was great. My point of telling you this story here about this deal here that I didn't make any money on. The point is, when you can buy houses are great. Houses are great investments to have because they're reliable. You people usually live in them for a long time, and if you can buy multiple of them like this at one time, it's like buying a 10-unit apartment complex. Mind you, they are separate. They are all separate in their own spaces, in their own areas or whatever. They each have a roof and they each have their own different problems specific to each property. With an apartment complex, you just got one building, that houses all of the units inside of it. But if you have a chance to buy a portfolio of houses together, that's something that you should look into. That's something not to ignore. You shouldn't ignore it because that's the thing with houses. Like when you're trying to get them one by one, like with this property here I was looking at earlier. When you try to buy them one by one, bro, you're looking at these little small numbers, and then of course, depending on how you're going to buy it, if you're going to get a loan or whatever, buying one property, it just doesn't make sense, when you're getting a mortgage, especially when you're getting a mortgage. But see, in this type of situation, you can get a mortgage and you can be able to pay for this. You know what I'm saying? You can be able to pay for this. It just depends, on the numbers here. If I can quickly, let's see, what is that? Is that 6%? Yeah, 6%. So, I'm looking at here, for 800 grand, you would have to pay 48. So for 800 grand, so to get a loan for 800 grand, cause you would have to put down, if you was to buy this for 2 million, you'd have to put down 200 grand. And then you would have to get a loan for 800,000 at 6%, and then the payment on this would be 4,800 per month. The property is the portfolio is bringing in 10K a month. So you would have to do this, subtract this from it. That's just the payment, and that's just a rough estimate. That's the payment. Of course, you have to add in the insurance and the taxes and all that. So maybe you can make like 3 or 4 grand per month on this. But that's good, bro. That's good. And you do want to make sure that you have some money set aside out of this for expenses and whatnot. Property management. Whatever you're gonna have. But even if you get away with 2 grand here, that's pretty good. 2 grand per month, it's small. 2 grand per month times 12, and then you have 24 grand coming in on the 200,000 that you put down. So this is the cash that you put down. So that's like it's a 10% something, 10, 11% return. So it's a 12% return here. 12% return. That's pretty good, bro. And this is a good amount of money coming in. 2 grand that you keeping. It's a good amount of money coming in. Some people may argue against this because you got 10 houses, 10 families that you have to deal with. So you have to, see if it's worth the headache to make 2 grand on these 10 houses and have to deal with if you're managing the property yourself, maybe you got a property management company doing all the managing. for you, and you just collecting the check, if that works, then it works. But my point is, you just don't want to ignore this. And houses, they're there for the long term. And then rents go up, bro. These rents, they'll go up. So they go up over time. They go up over time. And then the real value in houses is the equity. So this will turn, in the next, if it's a 3%, if you getting 3% in equity every year, so that's what? That's 30,000. That's 30,000 in equity every year times 10 years. So in the next 10 years, you'll get hopefully it appreciates more than that, because that's just keeping up with inflation. But let's say it goes up about 5%. So let's say 2%. So that'd be 200,000. 5%. So you'll be keeping. So if it goes up in equity 5% per year, because these houses, this portfolio is doing that. It's going up probably 5% in equity every year. These houses, because they're in great neighborhoods. People want to live there, so they may be appreciating more than that, more than 5%. But let's just say 5%. You keep, if it's 5% and 3% is inflation, you're keeping 2% in the next 10 years. So that'll be 200 grand. So this will go up to 1.2 million. But look, man, you got 1.2 million here, and you got 200 grand, and you've been making 24,000 the last 10 years. So you've been making, you made 240,000 here. You've been making 240 grand here for the last 10 years. So you got 440 grand that you've made in 10 years. 440 grand in 10 years. Now you divide that by 10 years, you've made 44 grand a year. My arrows are crazy. Yeah, man. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good income. For you never want to quit buying. 44 grand a year. For the last 10 years, you've been making an extra 44 grand every year, and that's net. That's like pure profit here. And so you got this, and then you got other things that you're buying. You never want to quit buying. But my point is, you don't want to quit buying. You don't want to overlook houses. You do want to look at them. Maybe as a start, they probably won't work for you, but you gotta do something. This is for long-term rent, not short-term, not Airbnb and mid-term rentals and all that. With those in college dorm, turn the house into a college housing. All that can make you, much more money, but it could be much more of a headache. So you have to look at things. And my point today is that everyone is dealing with the same thing with houses. They just don't pencil right right now, because of how high the interest rates are. But if you can buy multiple of them at one time, you definitely want to look into that. But that's all I want to talk about today. I'll talk to you another time.